Welcome to week one, Psychology of Consciousness. This is a brand new course this semester, and I am David Tomasi, or David Tomasi, your instructor. I hope you will enjoy the fascinating topics that we'll be covering the entire semester. Today, we will begin with Module 1. And with Module 1, my main idea is to discuss the basic tenets of this fascinating field, as well as giving you some background about the research, the philosophical and theoretical background to this course, and why not, a little bit about myself and what brought me here, so that I can explain away my thick accent. I mentioned this in every course. And I also hope that you will have the same chance to share with the rest of us some of the things that make you you, some of your background, some of your interests, your curiosities, and what brought you to this course and to learn a little more about this fascinating field. 15 weeks course, entirely online, so all the materials will be available to you, including all assignments, quizzes, discussions. And every week I will be posting a new video to which you can reply with your comment below, as you know, this usual jargon on YouTube, or you can just add a post on the discussion board as part of Canvas. I just want to clarify that any comments that you post on YouTube are not mandatory for this course, so you can just watch the videos and just interact with your peer on Canvas. But if you so choose, you can also ask questions, make some comments, so that I can add some of the things that you might want to explore further as part of the following module. I'd like to offer the opportunity to every student so that I can cater to you and your interest to better serve your learning curve. Now, without further ado, let's begin by addressing the main elements in the syllabus. So let me open it up here on Canvas and see what we can discuss today. All right. So first thing first, textbook. It's not mandatory. It's simply a recommendation, because as part of the course, we have to understand the importance of the scientific method. And so the textbook that I recommended, it's on critical neuroscience. It's a textbook that I have used in the past, and it provides a general overview of all the fascinating research studies that underlie what? Consciousness and the psychology of the field, so that we have some solid scientific evidence that corroborates some of the claims that we will make through the class. So some of the questions in the course description: does the soul exist, or is it just a byproduct of the brain? What role do spirituality and religion play? Does science support transcendental knowledge, esoteric practices, and mystical wisdom? And finally, is there evidence for the belief in the afterlife and the divine? Now, these are just 4 questions that hopefully will help you navigate the complexity of the course, and will hopefully also be intriguing enough to understand what brings you here in the first place. Now, let me start by exploring a few things here. The course discusses the current scientific research and literature, as well as the history, the philosophical, anthropological, and social context of modern neuroscience, to present a scientist-based and student-friendly exploration of the neural underpinnings of cognition, emotion, and action, and of the processes at the base of attention, memory, sensory motor abilities, language, and understanding. So as you will see, the scientific part of this course will be, for the most part, no pun intended, based on the textbook. Now, given that the textbook is not mandatory, is recommended, I want you to know that as long as you pay attention to the lectures, you should have enough knowledge to perform well in every quiz and every other assignment. So the textbook should corroborate some of the things we discuss in class, especially in the context of further exploring these are the topic to prepare yourself for the final exam. But if you are able to follow all lectures, then you should have all the necessary skills to complete the quizzes. What are the objectives of this course? Define psychology of consciousness and the mind-body connection. Examine the current research on the philosophical mind-body problem. Describe basic neuroanatomy, including structure, function, and correlation. Again, we need to have a solid knowledge of the brain in order to understand what consciousness is. Discuss the complexity of multiple subfields of neuroscience, philosophy, psychology, anthropology, sociology, and history, and their answer to the question of being human. Develop an awareness of the universality of brain function, structure, and capabilities. Analyze multiple philosophical perspectives on self, hope, faith, wisdom, knowledge, and sense of belonging. Examine computational, cognitive, biological, emotional, synesthetic, sensory, therapeutic, clinical, medical, and pharmacological components of neural activity. Understand and describe similarity and variability on the sociocultural and ethno-racial spectrum of emotional responsiveness, cognitive, attentive, and mnemonic processes, as well as sensory motor abilities, language, and understanding. And finally, last but certainly not least, expand the conversation on the possibility of existence of human versus non-human system of perception, self, psychological processes, soul, and spirit. So, you will find the full syllabus online with all the attendance policies, etc. Now, of course, this is an entirely online course, so you can attend all the lectures from home or whenever you have an internet connection and hopefully enjoy the materials, and then at your own pace, complete all the assignments. Now, there will be deadline for each quiz, but all the materials will be available to you until the end of the semester, just in case you might experience some technical glitches. All right, so let's begin with the syllabus. As I mentioned, subject to change. The syllabus is only there to give you a general framework and orientation about the calendar and the expectation of the course. And also the syllabus focuses mostly on the scientific apparatus of the course. But of course, talking about consciousness also means that a significant part of the class will be focused on discussion. Now, given that this is an online course, I'll be mostly talking to myself and to you via this video, but it's about discussing, analyzing, experiencing things, not just memorizing things. I mentioned this in most of my courses. I want people to make sense of things, not just to memorize numbers and data. I want them to explore, to change who they are, and to develop a new sense of self. Hopefully, this course will do just that. So, as far as the syllabus entails, you have 15 weeks of materials, and the two main stepstones, so to speak, are the midterm and the final. Now, the midterm is pretty much a rehearsal for the final paper. So on week 7, I'm expecting students to submit a midterm draft, 1 page at least description of the topic they would like to focus on in preparation for the final exam. And the final exam, beside all the quizzes, it's pretty much the submission of the final paper, 10 pages at least paper on the topic related to this course too. Consciousness, awareness, perception, psychology, neuroscience, and I'll be happy to navigate that as we progress through the course. Now, of course, you have all the materials and library supports right here or right over there on Canvas. But please feel free to ask me questions. I'll be happy to answer them via email. So let's begin with the syllabus, and then we will explore some of the topics for this first module, introductory module. So today, it's pretty much a course introduction. The main question is, what is psychology of consciousness? And I will let you know a little bit about my background. Hopefully, we'll share yours via the discussion and some of the expectation of the course. Now, technically speaking, I will not monitor attendance in person because it's an online course. So I will assess your participation by checking your posts, your discussion, and how much you interact as part of the weekly quizzes in the course. So this is the intro to the course. Next week, module 2, a scientific re-examination of the mind-body problem, a general overview, perspective from philosophy, psychology, history, and anthropology, and introduction to chapter 2. Again, the book is only a support to the course. If you pay attention to the lecture, you should be just fine. So the mind-body problem, we will see, is the problem at the center of consciousness, at the center of what makes us tick as human beings. Week 3, the exact science of the hard matter. We'll see how much scientific evidence there is for certain claims we'll make through the semester, and why is the scientific method so important in this field. We will talk about neuroanatomy, we'll talk about cellular molecular neuroscience, and we'll discuss the theoretical background of examining, controlling, and verifying. In this week, we'll also have some external links, other videos I will ask you to review in preparation for the course, but most of the work is focused on the completion of quizzes as well as discussion. That's the main core of what you have to do for the course, besides review materials. Week 4, part 2 of the exact science of the hard matter. We'll talk about stress. We'll talk about human growth and development, developmental neuroscience, evolutionary neuroscience, and neuroimaging and neuroengineering. What techniques and technology we have to assess our sense of self and our consciousness. Week 5, it's almost the central part of the first half of the semester, between psyche and mind. We will address that today a little bit, and we'll explore that further in week 5. So some of the discussion will have to do with emotions, with presentation, affective neuroscience, neuropsychology and psychotherapy, and anthropology. Now, part of that will also be a board to behavioral neuroscience and what we will discuss in week 6, which will be neuroethology, psychology of religion, and neurotheology. Week 7, medicine on the brain, of the brain, and off, with 2 F's, the brain. What it means to apply what we know to heal ourselves from within, what it means to find a cure, how we define disease, illness, disorder. And this is, of course, a hybrid module, which has a lot to do with medicine, neuroscience, and neuropsychology. Now, week 7, of course, is also the midterm exam or quiz. So the midterm exam, given that this is an online class, it's pretty much the quiz and the draft for the final paper. The draft, again, is just an introduction to the topic that you would like to focus on for the final project. And the final project is pretty much a paper on a topic of choice, your choice, that is, which means that this does not have to be a scientific paper. So in terms of the references that you need to provide, my suggestion will be around 7, but you can focus on a religious topic, a psychological topic, a neuroscientific topic, a social topic. You can focus on yourself, you can focus on society, on your friends, on something you studied in the past you would like to explore further from a transcendental perspective. You can talk about the discrepancy between your point of view, your lifestyle, your philosophy, and the ones of your parents, your friends, your significant others, etc., etc. It's very, very broad, and I encourage you to explore these topics from the perspective of growth and insight. Week 8, we will continue with neurosurgery, neurology, neurocritical care, polyneurology, and probably my very favorite, psychoneuroimmunology, how everything comes together. Everything's holistic. We're all connected in this world. Week 9, brain, culture, and society, context and situation, mother nature, father nurture. It's a pun there, of course. Medical anthropology and ethnomedicine. Again, every module is divided according to the structure of the textbook, okay, just for clarity to have a reference there. But every topic will be discussed in depth in the lecture, which also means that I'm not expecting you to memorize every single thing I'll be discussing here, because it's really humanly impossible in 15 weeks, of course. So I will emphasize the things I really want you to memorize. So we'll go through most of the topics discussed in each quiz and each assessment so that you know what topic to study for the following assessment, for the following assignment. All right, week 10, brain, culture, and society, part 2. cultural, cross-cultural, and trans-cultural psychiatry, cultural and trans-cultural neuroscience, social neuroscience, neuroanthropology, and sociobiology. Week 11, the first part of perception and cognition, 2 weeks chapter, the mind-body problem and general overview. Now, this will not be only discussed in week 11, but throughout the course. In fact, we could say that psychology of consciousness is pretty much the application of the mind-body problem from a clinical, social, and personal perspective. But we will discuss more in depth how we know what we know. So perceiving, seeing, evidencing, and understanding. So the cognitive apparatus. Week 12, perception and cognition, computational neuroscience, sensory neuroscience, theory of perception, neuroinformatics, system neuroscience, etc. Week 13, we are getting closer to the end of the semester, so we will talk about philosophy as a basic approach toward consciousness and neuroscience and see how psychology fits into that. And we will suggest a model, which I call the triple S model: self, soul, and spirit. We'll explore how that plays into this course. And of course, psychology of consciousness as its own field. Finally, the very last week, because I like to leave week 15 as a celebration of successes, we will discuss philosophy's basic approach toward conscious neuroscience toward the end. So part 2, and we will further discuss things such as virtual reality, artificial intelligence, sense, purpose, meaning, and neuro heuristics. So this is, in short, our syllabus. Okay. So as I said, this is a course on psychology of consciousness, and we should at first define the term. Now, this, as I mentioned, is module 1. Okay. So as I said, week 1, module 1, there might be some discrepancies simply because certain semester we have different holidays. So sometime I will use the term module 1, sometime I will use week 1. I mean the same thing. So on Canvas, you'll see that each module will have a little description, a little video, and when applicable, either a discussion or a quiz. And you just click on it and you should be able to access all the materials. As I said, if you have any issue, please let me know. So today it's a start. The first start is analyzing the terms. I always do this in every class for 2 main reasons. One is because, as you already noticed, I have a thick accent, so I like to write things down. I like to explain things, and I like to untangle all those conceptual modalities hidden behind the words we use. So before we understand what we know, we need to clarify how we describe them. Okay. And as I mentioned multiple times, I really, really love calligraphy. I love handwriting. And I feel that the best way to learn everything is to make sense right in front of our eyes, when applicable, and using our senses, which simply means that despite of the fact that this is an online course, I really encourage you to have a block note, a little booklet, where you write down the things that I will be discussing with you, to make some schematas, to write some summaries, to make sense of things, to even do a little bit, to create some diagrams and drawings, which usually helps from a cognitive standpoint, memorizing things better, but will also make things more personal. So I like to do this. It makes even more sense if I have an in-person class, because I like to write and explain things live and answering questions. But I still think that we're going to have a lot of fun this semester using this video technology. So module 1, psychology of consciousness. As usual, I like to discuss the term psychology first and then consciousness afterwards. Now, defining these terms is really, I would say, 0.5% of what we will be discussing this semester. Now, some people will take this course as a general allied health or medicine or healthcare or social science, psychology, etc. course, which means that, yes, there will be some overlapping topics between this course and other classes I teach, especially neuroscience class, medicine class, and psychology classes, because, of course, we are talking about the same words. And yet, the depth of this course is definitely more intense than a regular, so to speak, psychology 101 course, because consciousness is as complex as we are as human beings, and also because the research is really never ending, and yet it's old as the earth. We will see what I mean by that. So let's begin as I usually begin, to take apart these words. So the first one, let me get rid of module 1 here. The first one is psychology. So I will get rid of my consciousness. Hopefully I will not lose awareness in the meantime. And let's analyze psychology. Again, for the ones of you that took this course before, the Psychology 101 or developmental psychology or human growth and development or neuroscience, these will probably be already familiar to you, but it's always worth reviewing certain things. So psychology, the term psychology. Let's take it apart with 2 colors. I always like to add some color to it. The first one is this one. The second one is this one. And then there's a phonetic O in between, all right? So the first term is psyche, all right? Psyche. So I will write like this here, psyche. Okay. For clarity, I will use our alphabet, the Latin Roman alphabet, okay? Instead of the Greek, which will be the alphabet that we should use. Psyche is the term related to the psyche, okay? We will see what that means. Very often, psyche is described as or with the Greek letter psi, okay, or psi, okay, and then logic, okay, which for now we will relate to logos, okay. So psyche and logos. In fact, we could even say that the little O here, besides phonetic reasons and well, phonetic and grammar reason, in the grammar casus, you could say that psychology is the logos of psyche, okay? Logos of psyche. In short, what can we say about it? What does it mean, logos of psyche? Well, a straightforward answer will be that psychology is the logos, the study of psyche, the mind, the study of the mind. This will be a shortcut, a summary. Someone will ask you, what are you studying? I'm studying psychology. What is that? I'm studying the mind. Okay, so let's see if there's more to it. Let's start with the logos. The logos, it's one of the most fascinating terms ever, period, in reality. Let me just close this one. It's a term that has to do with Greek mythology, with biblical knowledge, with theology. So it's one of the terms that that has to do with a variety of philosophical discussion. Okay, so again, Greek logos related to logic, logical, logistics, etc., etc. Okay, it's to some extent our embodied human nature. Okay, in Genesis, in the Bible, is translated usually in Latin as verbum. Okay, verbum. Okay. So the word, so to speak, the word embodied, the word manifested, the epiphany of the word. Okay, so the reality manifestation of the word is the stuff that becomes our path, that clarifies, that names things, that labels things. So the verb, the logos, the logic is making sense of things. So it's starting things. So if we label things, if we name things, we associate a name to a concept, that we master that concept. Now, this is extremely important because if you don't remember anything else about this course, this is one thing I want you to remember. We tend to believe in our modern, materialistic, positivistic world, we tend to believe that the world is made of facts. And the more facts we learn, the more we know. Now, there is enough evidence as to why this is important, because if, for instance, if you need to learn how to do math or physics, you need to learn some facts. And some facts can also be applicable to other fields that are less logically, empirically based, such as history, for instance, or anthropology. And yet we don't experience the world with facts. We interpret the world as understanding, conceptualizing, as patterns, as archetypes, as symbols. Okay, so let me just write a few words here. Okay, I'll write them, let's say here. We interpret the words as archetypes. Archetypes. As patterns. As symbols. Okay. Okay. So, and all of this is related to the concept. Okay. We conceptualize things. So let me explain each of these terms. Okay. So concept. So what does it mean, first of all, that we interpret the world not as facts or as series of facts, but as archetypes, patterns, symbols? It simply means that we interpret the world at all times. Okay. A classical example is that you might have an idea, I'll use this term somewhat loosely now. You have an idea of a car, okay? A car, a modern item, modern object, okay? Now, we do not understand each portion of the car as itself. Now, of course, you can take the car apart and see the piston and the engine as a whole, the tire, etc., the steering wheel. But we do understand that the totality makes it a car. We can recognize a car as part of all these things. Now, you might wonder, well, you can still assume that a car is a car even if you take it apart, if you see all the spare parts. Yes, but we do have this concept that brings it together. Our interpretation of the world glues things together, makes sense of the world. We recognize it as a car. Now, the car might be something that is external, but in every interpretation of the world, we are direct part of the interpretation. We cannot take ourselves apart from it. We are nature. We are part of it. We are the observer and the observed. Okay, these double heuristics we will discuss. So we are part of reality itself. How about a friend? How about that specific friend? How about your best friend? Okay, we do have a concept, but we realize that this is more than the sum of its parts. Okay, so to a very big extent, your best friend will have exact same quote unquote spare parts and as any other friend, in fact, as any other human beings, even more. As the vast majority of mammals, we share those spare parts with most of other mammals, down to brain activity. This is so important because one of the biggest mistakes that, from a theoretical standpoint, some scientists can make is to assume that just because we have animal models to understand the brain, that everything about ourselves as human beings is exactly as any other animal or any other mammal, okay? Which is absolutely nonsense from this perspective, okay? Now, there is still enough reason to rely on animal models in neuroscience, okay, of course, in brain imaging, because that gives us a lot of neuroscientific knowledge, so we should not abandon that, but it's not everything. So we interpret things as what? As archetype. The term archetype simply means, I'm going to simplify here, an archeos, ancient, okay, almost outside of time and space, type, a typos, okay, a inner pattern, an inner structure, okay, that is ever present. In philosophy, we could almost call this a perennial pattern, perennial, okay, perennial. If you think about the philosophical and literary work by Mircea Eliade, for instance, or Émile Zola, or René Guénon, for instance, perennial philosophy, archetype, okay? And you can find that translated into the word of Carl Gustav Jung, for instance, okay? Carl Gustav Jung. Patterns, this is almost self-explanatory, it's a relatively common English word, okay? sequence, okay? You can see the sequence of the sequence. From the perspective of consciousness, one of the most important sequence is not a linear sequence, but it's a fractal sequence, okay? A fractal. Okay, so pattern as fractal, where not only the sum is the total is more than the sum of its parts, but each part is a manifestation of a smaller part, and the other way around. So you have a connection between what? The big world and the small world, between the macrocosm and the microcosm, okay? Think about the fractal as a tree, the tree branch, okay? Where each part of the tree is a minute representation of the whole, and vice versa, okay? And finally, symbols, okay? Now, this is also this is something I mentioned throughout my courses, because the symbolic understanding is as essential as understanding itself, okay? And again, we're only in the logos now here, okay? So let me just spend a few seconds on symbols, and then we'll see how that plans out. So I will have to make some room, because otherwise there's not enough room on that whiteboard here. Thankfully, I'm not using a blackboard, although I like blackboards more, because otherwise I'm going to make a mess of myself. So symbols. So let me make some room here, okay? So again, logos, logic, verb, the word, okay? Capital T, the word, capital W as well. So symbols, let me continue the line here. So symbols, right here, symbol, okay? As opposite of dia or diabol, okay? So again, this is only introduction, so we will not spend too much time. But what does it mean to have a symbolic understanding of reality? It means to have an understanding that brings everything together, not just the opposite, that is to some extent a contradiction in term, because having opposites, it's already a diabolic perspective. So what I mean by that? Let's start with the first one. Symbol is to put things. I will translate balain with to put, to bring, to connect to some extent, okay? Together, okay? And again, even together, it's really not a good translation, but it does a good job to bring the concept home. So you don't even see it, I guess, with that. Maybe I can just make this a little higher. So together, put, okay. I will make sure to fit everything there. So putting things together, okay, bringing things to a unity, okay, it's the holistic, the omnicomprehensive perspective of reality, okay. So a symbolic understanding, it's an understanding of reality that considers patterns and complexity. It doesn't put things in black and white terms only. So I perceive the word as symbol, okay, as a general understanding. Sorry, I'm going to do it a little higher here. As a general understanding, okay. One of the neuroscientists that we will quote a few times in this semester will be Gazzaniga, and especially the split brain, the corpus callosotomy is something that's very relevant to this conceptualization of symbol versus diabol, okay? I will just write his name here, but don't you worry, we'll mention his name multiple times. Gazzaniga, or as it should be pronounced in Italian, Gazzaniga, okay? Corpus callosotomy. Okay. Of course, that surgical procedure operating on the corpus callosum, which we'll discuss. So symbolic together, seeing the picture as a whole. Diabol instead, okay. The picture split, okay? Instead of putting things together, splitting apart in opposites, okay? Up and down, left and right, black and white, open and closed, okay? They are both essential to reality. And we can also make a claim that in our modern world, and by modern I mean the world at the very least, sees humanism. Humanism in the real sense of the term, not the modern humanism, transhumanism of the 21st century. Humanism, I would say the Tuscan Florentine Renaissance or pre-Renaissance, 1400 through the 15th century, focus on logic and matter, physical matter, as separate from anything spiritual, transcendental. Okay, so for instance, a diabolic perspective will be a perspective that distinguishes good and bad, or even more so, up and down. Okay, so for instance, in this screen here, a diabolic perspective will distinguish this word right here and up. Okay, perennial right here is up, and corpus callosotomy will be down. Okay, a symbolic perspective will see the whole. Okay, this is not just up and down, they do belong in a spectrum, in a sequence. Okay, now notice that diabole in Greek, it's a kind of what? Our devil. Okay, the term devil. Okay, so do not trust that fake pseudo etymology that devil has to do with evil. Absolutely nothing to do with that. We'll explore that. Evil is actually a cognate of the German übel, okay, which we find in our discussion on disease, disorder, and illness. Okay, Übelkeit, okay, feeling nauseated, feeling sick. So devil and evil are not related, but the devil, of course, is an embodiment of diabolic perspective. And this has to do, from a theological perspective, with the fall, with the capital F, okay, with the absence of light, or rather, the misplacing of the higher light, the Luciferian perspective, okay? If you think about Lucifer is the fallen angel, the carrier of light, but the arrogant angel, the one who wants to substitute himself to God. So it's a full knowledge, okay, deprived of what? The necessary prudence, the necessary understanding, the necessary humility and time frame that it's divine. It's something that wants to go to conclusion. So it's a perspective we need to use in empirical sciences to calculate, to modulate, to assess, and to pile up information, but it's not the same as full knowledge. In other words, you can interpret the world and know all the facts about the world, and still that's not the world. Classical example, you can know everything about the chemical composition of a painting, but that in itself, it's not the painting. Even if you can reproduce every single color, it's not the painting itself. Never mind, it's not the experience of looking at a painting. Okay? Another example, love. You can know everything about all the literature, poetic literature, all the poems about love, but the experience of love, it's not the same. Now, careful, what I'm not saying here is that the symbolic tradition is only experiential, okay? It's only our experience as people, as opposed to the scientific empirical one. It's not what I'm trying to say here as well. But those two are juxtaposed. So we see the world as symbols, okay? Finally, the term concept is the next step. Concept is something that is grasped, cum in Latin, okay, which is connected to the Greek sum, okay, same thing, togetherness, okay, and sept, concipio, capture, okay, captivating, okay. Interesting that too much of it creates a prison. In medieval Latin and in modern Italian, captivus, cattivo is the bad one, the bad person, okay. Captivity in English is taking prisoner, being in a cage. So too much conceptualization becomes rigid, becomes extreme, becomes black and white, becomes right versus left, okay? As opposed to the process of conceptualizing according to the logos, that is much more holistic, okay? You label something, you will control something, but this control has to happen according to what? To the logical process, the divine process, okay? Otherwise, you categorize people, for instance, in good and bad, and you miss the spectrum, okay? Much more to say, and we're only on logos here. Now, let's talk a bit about psyche here, okay? Psyche, and then we'll continue with consciousness. Now, I want to be mindful of the time, but I want to, so to speak, cover a lot today to give you a sense of the direction that this course will take. And don't you worry, I will not only use the whiteboard. It will be a lot of slides and other fancy things in the course. So I will not expect you to master everything that I write on the whiteboard. But this helps my conceptualization as well. As I talk, especially if I'm talking to myself, in the case of an online course, writing things down is usually helpful. All right, so logos, the understanding, the verb. Let's work on psyche, okay, says the psychologist. What is psyche? Let me use the red one, psyche, right here. Okay, again, let me write it again. Psyche. Psyche. See, okay, psychologia. It's a Greek term that can be attached to a variety of meaning. The most common of which are, of course, mind, our mind. Okay, right? Then our spirit. As well as our self. Okay. Mind, spirit, and self. Now, the word itself means butterfly, or is related to a butterfly, okay, psyche from Greek mythology, and butterfly. The butterfly as the entity that entered the human body upon physical birth, and the entity that eventually will leave the body upon death, upon biological death or physical death, okay? So the butterfly as, again, a symbol, an archetype of the soul, okay? Now notice, I did not add soul here quite yet, and this is due to a variety of added interpretation that we will see make a lot of sense throughout the course. Now, the fascinating things about a course in psychology of consciousness is that it really bridges the gap between multiple fields, but also helps understanding things such as spirituality and religion from a very profound perspective. Now, profound perspective does not mean things such as psychology of religion, where everything is juxtaposed as if they were all equivalent. Absolutely not. It simply means digging deeper to the very source of all of these elements. We'll see how that plans out. So, mind, spirit, and self. Let's start from the easier one, the mind. Okay, the mind, if you are a materialist, okay, a person who believes that matter and facts is all there is in reality, okay, mind is pretty much the same as matter, okay, matter. Okay, so there's a usual joke that I tell every semester, so bear with me if you took a previous class. So what is mind? It doesn't matter. What is matter? Never mind. Okay, so as an explanation of the fact these two are opposite, matter, if you are a materialistic, okay, is connected to brain, the physical object, the organ, okay, brain. Okay. Okay. Or mind as something somewhat in between a soul, okay, and the self. Now, in our secular society, the self is a term that's much more that's used much more often than soul, because soul always involves a religious undertone, or at the very least a spiritual undertone. But the mind is a concept that is associated with this connection between what we can touch, or at least analyze with our scientific method. Okay, think about neuroimaging, and that's why neuroscience plays such a big role in this course, as something that's less palpable, less matter-based, as it implies, more ethereal, less empirical, transcendental. It goes beyond. Okay, self and soul. Self is what we refer to as such. Okay, it's also in grammar term, the self, right? Self as opposed to one self or multiple selves, right? Soul as a translation of the Latin anima. Okay. Okay, anima, which of course is the root of animal, but the way we use the term animal nowadays, it's really not the way it used to be used in traditional with capital T sense. If you read the word by Aristotle, for instance, or Aquinas, okay, Thomas Aquinas, the animal self, okay, it's confronted, not just juxtaposed necessarily, with the intellectual self. Nowadays, we tend to use the animal model in neuroscience to assume the fact that just because we have similar matter-based patterns and neurological patterns, we are the same. But in traditional sense, anima means much more, and even more so if you want to use the male equivalent, animus. Okay, again, in the work by C.G. Jung, for instance. So soul, the German equivalent, Germanic equivalent in modern German, Seele, okay, but also in terms of mental function. So when we think about that, we think about the connection between something that is physically based with something that is more, as the name implies, spiritual. Okay, so spirit from the Latin, can we all see the Latin spiritus? Spiritus, okay, which is equivalent, not the same, but for now we'll assume equivalency, okay, with the German Geist, okay, Geist. Geist, which of course gave birth to our ghost. Okay, ghost. Now, in modern English, talking about a spirit or a ghost appears to indicate a very different thing. In fact, in very modern English, the last 100 years, 200 years at most, it tends to have a negative connotation, ghost, okay? But if you think about traditional knowledge, and you think about Latin Mass, for instance, the Roman Catholic Church, the Byzantine Catholic Church, or the Orthodox, think about the Holy Ghost, okay? It's really the Holy Spirit, is the divine spirit, is the divine entity. And this is not true just for Indo-European languages, such as English, which is a Germanic language for the most part, or Latin, okay? But it's also true for other languages, the Sino-Tibetan languages, and even more so, since we were talking about the Bible earlier, about Semitic languages. So if we're talking about Syriac, if we're talking about Hebrew, if we're talking about Arabic, all of those in the conceptualization of the term spirit, ruach, ha-ruach, okay, they indicate spirit as air, as breathing, as a divine breath, okay? In Greek, we also have the term, we can write maybe here, pneuma or pneuma, okay, pneuma, with a related, I would say, mechanistic explanation, okay? Think about the respiration modality, the breathing in, the breathing out, okay, which is consistent with all other forms of traditional knowledge. Think about in the Sanskrit sense of the term, think about the Indo-European culture, okay, think about the mana, okay, the Atman, mana and Atman, okay, which of course is a cognate of the, what, the German word for breathing, Atman, okay? So those things are all related. So the spirit, okay, the psyche, the brain, and the studies. So psychology studies all these things. Now, to move forward with our lecture here, let's think about what, sorry, let me just take a look at the time here. Okay, good. So if we think about consciousness now, we'll focus on something that's even more profound. This was not complex enough. So consciousness, okay? And in order to do this, I would like to make a few other claims. Well, it's not really a claim, that are corroborated by history, etymology, anthropology, but remarks, a few other remarks about words. So let's start with the term itself, okay, consciousness. Okay. Okay. So first, what does it mean to be conscious? Okay, and there are related terms: consciousness, conscientiousness, awareness, wakeful state, wakefulness. Okay, enlightenment, being enlightened, being awake, being woke. So all these terms have to do with what? What we said earlier about the symbolic or diabolic perspective. Think about something that is very straightforward, regardless of all the quote unquote mental gymnastics that a person might make. If a person is in the operating room under anesthesia, at some point, the doctor will have to evaluate whether the person is there or not. Now, this is a diabolic feature. The person is either there or not. The person is either alive or not alive or dead. This seems to be a dualistic perspective. The switch is either on or off, okay? And the reason why we had to make this assessment is because eventually, if the person is dying of a physical death, then the doctor will have to make a statement about the physical death. And as we will see in modern neuroscience and medicine, there are two main ways to define death. One is the cardiothoracic death, so a heart-related death, and the other one is the brain death, a neurological death, okay, which is in turn connected to locked-in syndrome, comatose state, partial or full vegetative state, etc., etc. So whether we're taking a black and white, alive or dead, as opposed to a symbolic, a spectrum light, this will determine how we view consciousness, okay? And we'll also answer whether consciousness is the same as, for instance, awareness and perhaps, just to add one, wakefulness, okay? Okay. Now, all these three would also make sense if you attach some other ways to interpret that. For instance, can all these three be related to, let's see where I can fit it, something like intelligence? How about identity? First question is intelligence and identity subject-based, group-based, community-based, societal-based, okay? Well, you see already the biggest issue in intelligence. We can claim that intelligence is not person-based, subject-based, but it's ethnic-based, as in certain group of people are just smarter than others, okay? You can see how that already creates an ethical problem, regardless of the scientific validity of this claim. But saying that the people in this group are more intelligent in this group, and doesn't matter if this other group studies a lot, will never reach the similar intelligence, that in itself is a problem. How about identity? Where do I cease to lose my identity as a self, as an individual, and I become part of a group? Or the other one, at which point can I separate myself from the group and become my own self? Second part of the problem is, how long does it last? What about an afterlife? Once I'm dead, am I the same as my soul? In other words, is the soul me, or do I lose part of me since I'm losing my physical body? Moreover, if I can claim that the soul endures, will I endure with the same intelligence? How about my identity? Will I be still, in this case, David, afterlife, or I will just merge, melt, and morph into the reality? So those are all questions that psychology of consciousness attempts to answer in a systematic way. So consciousness, awareness, and wakefulness. Now, few more things I want to discuss before I let you go. And then I will just take a look at the parameters for next week to make sure that I don't miss anything. So this is just an intro. Let's leave awareness and wakefulness aside, because those are easier to discuss from an etymological standpoint, okay? Being awake, being aware, okay? The one thing that we can say is that you're aware either on the detail or on the big things. It's what we said earlier about corpus callosotomy and the symbolic and diabolic feature. For instance, if I'm telling you, I'm asking you to pay attention to this video, you might be aware of specific things, but not other things. For instance, if you're bored, you might be more tempted to scroll up and down or left or right the cursor to see how much time is left for the end of this lecture, or you might focus on this letter or this letter or this letter or this pattern here, kind of looks like a brain, or you might look, at me, my necktie, etc., or this, pencils or markers. But if I'm asking you to pay attention to what I'm saying, you might, at the very least, for the first 10 minutes or so, pay attention to my voice, and then everything else is left aside. So that has also to do with awareness. It's a selective form of attention. Consciousness has to do with being conscious, okay? But all these terms, okay, have to do with so the connection between science as knowledge together, okay? The more we share, the more we know, which also is a bridge to what? Artificial intelligence and virtual reality. It has to do with knowledge, okay, which in itself is a cognate of the Greek gnosis, okay, and the problematic pattern, okay, Gnosticism, okay, the Luciferian, the diabolic feature. We'll see how that plays into it, and then knowledge in itself. Now, one thing that I mention all the time in my classes is that knowledge can be tripartite, multifold. We could have at least 3 types of knowledge. Think about Aristotle. So you have episteme, you have phronesis, and you have techne. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Now we will talk about this in depth, and this might sound familiar to the ones of you that took other courses in the past. All this can be translated as science, but it just take a different route, different approach. Episteme is the science in the modern theoretical term, modern theoretical sense of the term. So episteme as in epistemology, the theoretical method, the scientific method, the investigation of science itself. Technology, the tools that allow us to do some things, to some extent also the facts. In fact, one of the issues with the modern world is the assumption, which is completely unfounded, that we know more nowadays than we knew yesterday. In fact, something I mention all the time is that knowledge is like a book. If you open a book, okay, if you're doing your job right, you will study every single chapter, and each chapter will build upon the previous one. But what's happening, especially in modern times, is the arrogant presupposition that once we learn chapter 5, it's much better than chapter 4. Now notice that we might know more in chapter 5 than chapter 4. So we might know more in 2024 than we knew in 2010, for instance. It might be true, okay? But the fact that in chapter 5, we know more than in chapter 4, think about thriller, for instance, we know more details about the potential thief or murder. The fact we know more in chapter 5 than chapter 4 does not mean that we might not have forgotten already what happened in chapter 2 or 3. And that's unfortunately what happens in science, is the arrogant presupposition that the more we continue, the more we progress in our knowledge. The truth is that something we know more because of technology, for instance, brain knowledge, we know more, but this is not everything. What also means a lot in science is phronesis or prudence, okay, which we tend to view in moralistic or moralizing terms nowadays, but simply because we lost, for the last, I would say, maybe 1,500 years at least, the understanding that science, that knowledge, is always aimed at something, at the good, the truth, and the beautiful. So I will stop here for a second, just a few more things to conclude, in order to prepare you for the first discussion and the first quiz. Now, let me just review my syllabus here. So that's how we interpret things such as critical understanding, as theoretical understanding. For instance, critical neuroscience, it's not just a critic against neuroscience, but it's an inner awareness of the strength and the limits of neuroscience or science in general. So it's something that has to do with knowledge, and this has a straightforward connection with brain activity. So this is something we'll discuss in depth, but if this is our brain, okay, a quick brain diagram here, okay, and the assumption is that we can discuss the brain from an inner outer perspective, up and down, front, back. So you have 4 main lobes, okay? This is a very brief review. So don't you worry about remembering all of this, okay? With the cerebellum alone. For now, there's the 4 lobes, all right? So the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Don't you worry, we'll discuss all of this in depth, okay? But one of the things that I want to stress is that we talk about the symbolic and diabolic understanding of reality. The very last part of the brain to develop, of course, from the inner to the outer, from the limbic system out to the cortex, the bark, the external layer of the brain, the very last part is the prefrontal lobe, in particular, the prefrontal cortex, okay? Which is the part of the brain that we need to use to make sense of reality according to what we said earlier about logic and scientific empirical knowledge, okay? So, of course, this is juxtaposing this dualistic perspective, okay, where you have mind opposed to matter, okay? A united perspective, holistic perspective, monistic perspective, monism, right? Monism will be a perspective that combines mind and matter, okay? Now, there's also a field in philosophy called embodied cognition that attempts to bridge this gap, okay? Embodied cognition, which, as the name implies, embodied cognition, as it implies, is studying knowledge, the cognitive process, from the perspective of being inside our body. So you don't have a separation of the fact out there and myself in here, okay? I experience the world through my body, through my senses, through my experience, okay? As I mentioned multiple times, being an expert of something means also making the experience of something or onto something, okay? So we are not just our mind, we are our mind and our body. And this has a lot of implication in certain theological framework where some spiritual perspective view the mind as the soul and therefore completely separate from the body. We are really our souls. Our body, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, do not matter as much, versus other spiritual and religious perspective, especially the one that involves some level of transubstantiation, transhumanistic perspective, resurrection, always combine mind and body as a unity, okay? And therefore, our subjectivity does indeed matter, okay? So yes, all our senses, all our experience do have a neural underpinning, and which we'll see. So to say that the brain does not play a role in reality, it's nonsense. We need the brain to function, to exist, and we need our body to function. But to say that the brain creates reality only makes sense according to what we said earlier about symbolic and diabolic perspective. Okay. All right, and this, of course, has also to do with two things. One, with the way we interpret this. So, as I mentioned, the prefrontal cortex here is the last part to develop from a neurobiological perspective, a human growth and development perspective, okay, all right? And that's why, this one is often referred to as the new man of the spirit, okay, in classical literature, okay? Do I have room here? Yes. The new man, the new man of the spirit, okay? In a sense, new because it's the newest part to be developed. Man, not as human adult male person, but man in the etymological sense, okay? German Mensch, okay? Not man, okay? Okay, the Mensch as a whole, as a human representative of humanity, of this spirit, because again, this spirit is the rational self, the higher self, okay? In that sense, spirit as in the logos, the higher self, as opposed to the limbic system, which is right here inside the brain. So to perform some neurosurgical three-dimensional drawing here, the limbic system, which is the old man of the flesh, okay? Flesh as in meat, as in matter, same as in German, Fleisch, okay? Fleisch. So again, the old man, because it's the older part of the brain, neurodevelopmentally speaking, okay? The older, the first one to be created, and has to do more with an animal-less self. Consider what we said about the animal earlier, so the more instinctual part of the brain, but also the part of the brain that has to do with preservation of biological life, as opposed to higher functioning cortical structure, okay? So this is the core of the concept. We need both perspectives, okay, in a different sequence, and also have to understand how within psychology of consciousness, we can never use things such as lack of either insight, personal responsibility, or absolute truth as an excuse for anything. So as we will see in this course, to claim that everyone has their own reality and there is no such thing as universal reality or an absolute reality is nonsense. And the other thing is that you cannot use brain function and brain structure as any type of cognitive excuse, as in my brain made me do it, okay? Now, of course, I mentioned this in many other courses, the two opposite extremes, okay? The extreme that has nature opposed to nurture are both equally bad. As a summary, nature versus nurture simply means that nature dominates or nurture dominates. If nature dominates and something is wrong with the brain, there's nothing you can do about it. You're doomed to experience certain things because of the brain. If nurture dominates, you don't blame the brain. You only blame, for instance, your education, your upbringing, your culture for everything bad that happened to you, okay? The positive thing is that if you are suffering from, for instance, low self-esteem from the wrong reasons, because there is a low self-esteem for the right reason, then you can blame certain neurological patterns for your current state of affairs. And vice versa, conversely, if you're also in a bad state of mind, you can blame certain patterns that you experience in your life as a way to demonstrate that once you liberate, once you free yourself from these impediments, then you will blossom again as a human person. But we will discuss that more in depth in the next few weeks. So to conclude, what is psychology of consciousness? It's a hybrid field. It's a multiple, holistic, omnicomprehensive field that attempts to bridge indeed the gap between brain and mind on one side, understand what consciousness is, and ask questions that have to do with religion, with spirituality, with sense of self, with hope, and ultimately with the good, the truth, and the beautiful. In other words, with love. So thank you very much. I will see you all next week. Feel free to, again, comment below, as they say, or send me an email. And please don't forget to complete the discussion and the quizzes as they come on the modules. All right. See you next time. Bye-bye.